We are pleased to be joined once again by Natalia Alamdari, reporter for Flatwater Free Press, today talking about her article about the ongoing difficulties of fighting domestic violence and how it ties to a tragedy in Norfolk. Natalia, thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, thank you for having me.
You center the story around the Christensen family in Norfolk. Hailey was murdered by Deshaun Gleaton Jr. For those who don't know, Gleaton had a history of domestic abuse, was out on bond at the time for charges related to an assault of Hailey. He is someone who had been labeled by the state prison system as high risk, but never really got any type of rehab treatment despite that. There are a number of hangups when it comes to programming for high-risk inmates that come from a lot of different places. What were some of the difficulties you uncovered over the course of your investigation into this?
Right. I guess so. The main thing in the way of getting into programming is the wait lists. And that's especially true for substance abuse programming. Those tend to have the highest wait lists among the different clinical programs. Also, just the order of who gets into a program. A lot of the way of handling that comes down to prioritizing people by, how close to their parole date are they? How close to their release date are they? For a lot of the clinical programs, it's considered best practices to do those within the last 2 to 3 years of a person's prison sentence to kind of flow with when they're being released. So that can result in a lot of shuffling around. Something else that comes up that I feel like people don't normally realize too is even the facility that you're at can determine what programs are available to you. I know that's true for the sex offender program. So if you're, say you're needing to be in a high security prison, but there's a program that's only offered at a medium security prison, you have to get into that facility first before you can even start your programs. And then kind of beyond Nebraska, just staffing and the after effects of COVID have really just shaken up programming access nationally, not just in Nebraska.
The Christensens are a fascinating piece to this, really trying to turn this into a positive as best they can. They found and connected with another family who's gone through a similar situation in Nebraska. They've teamed up with a state senator. What are some of the ideas that they've come up with?
Right. So part of what they helped pass last session was, and I'm blanking on the specific phrasing of it, but a domestic violence staff review team. So this is a group of stakeholders who would be brainstorming, what are different policy ways to tackle this problem? Let's look at the data, look at past cases and see what are kind of the similarities through all of these cases and the systemic problems through all of these cases that ultimately ended with a person dying. So it's still very much in the works. They're kind of in the stage of forming that team. But once that gets going, it'll be really interesting to see what reports they turn into the legislature each year, what suggestions they have. I know something that was at top of mind for the Christensen family was, how can police departments evaluate, whether to, or not necessarily police departments, just judges, I think, are the ones who have the control there, but how to release a person on bond, whether or not it's a safety risk to even let them out before they get to a trial. So it'll be really interesting to see what comes of that over the next few years as they get that going.
It seems like such a simple thing. Hailey Christensen is murdered. Let's take steps to prevent something like this from happening again. But there are, as this article points out, so many variables and complications. And depending on who you talk to, there are wildly varying opinions on how effective attempts to rehab domestic abusers can actually be. Among the many people that you talk to, how much of a sense do you get that there's even a belief? I mean, obviously there is among the Christensens and among the people who are trying to make this change, but overall, a belief that any type of meaningful solution can even be found.
Right. I think that is such a huge and difficult question that was really what I was trying to answer throughout this reporting. And I still don't have great answers. I don't think anyone does, just because it's kind of under researched. But something that came up when I was speaking with the Nebraska Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence was, batteries intervention programs are great and effective if you're working with a person who like actively wants to make change in their life. Like that's a great tool for them to be able to use. But then there are also people who are chronic abusers and will just continue doing what they've been doing. Their chances of change are much, much slimmer, but it's still worth trying, I believe. There were a lot of like different types of treatment that are being tested that I thought were really interesting. I spoke to a man in California who's been incarcerated in California, and he kind of started like a prisoner run program where they talk about, what is it in our lives that got us to this point? What behaviors do we want to change in ourselves? And they've worked with a couple hundred men at this point. And it's much more of a like grassroots peer support type program, which is another interesting approach. I think overall with prevention, it's something that has to start early in a person's life. Once a person is reaching the prison system, like there's just so many years and years of trauma and behavioral challenges leading up to that point. There's no like switch that you can flip. So it's really just a matter of keeping at it, keeping up that like treatment exposure to a person, and hoping for the best. Something the probation administrator had said was, just because a program isn't showing us like huge statistical changes, even if it's shifting feelings in one person and preventing one crime, one victim in the future, that in and of itself is effective in what you want to be seeing.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating article. Check it out for yourself at flatwaterfreepress.org. We've linked to it at newschannelnebraska.com. Natalia Almdari of the Flatwater Free Press, thank you so much for joining us.